The lore and story of Dead Cells with all DLCs by Squatch Gaming Official. We'll look at that. We'll look at that. I have no idea. I've not played this game. I got no idea. People just thrusting me into the world of lore. I was also, according to you guys, supposed to be told that I should... Some people also told me that I should watch more Warhammer stuff, so there's that.
Upon its full release in 2018, Dead Cells captivated players with its unique gameplay loop, which combined aspects of the Metroidvania genre of games with roguelike elements.
Yeah, that's also what I know. Like, it's roguelike, right? You die, you repeat again, you get stronger. That's what I've heard, pretty much.
Usually generating the structure of each level at the start of a run, thereby ensuring that no playthrough of the game is the same as another. The main draw of Dead Cells is in that gameplay loop, but it also has a story in its backdrop that is pretty interesting in its own right, which centers on the downfall of an island kingdom as its populace is transformed into monsters by a disease known as the malaise. After its release, the game received several DLCs and content updates that introduced new items, enemies, biomes, and lore, expanding the world and enriching the story.
Wait, there's a Castlevania DLC? Straight up? Oh, it is. Richter Belmont, Alucard. Oh, that's very interesting. I wonder if the other things are in there as well. Huh, very interesting.
However, due to how expansive the game has become, along with a slew of design choices, like having most of the lore appear in randomly generated lore rooms in the biomes or randomly generated blurbs when entering a level, and locking the story's true ending behind 2 clears of the game on its hardest difficulty, it's so easy for players to miss important information to piece everything.
Damn! The true ending. The true ending after beating it twice on the hardest difficulties. The fuck? Damn, that's rough, buddy.
Together. So, let's go ahead and gather all the information from the base game and all of its DLCs, put it all together, and present it here so we can see the lore and story of Dead Cells. Obviously, spoilers for the story of Dead Cells are ahead, so if you don't want to be spoiled, why the heck are you watching this? Seriously, just go play the game if you don't want to be spoiled.
Too late for that. I was intending on playing it, but too late for that.
If you're confused after playing it, you can come back later and watch this, and hopefully it'll clear up some of the confusion you have. Also, just as a warning, some of the storytelling may be a little weird, but that's because there's not really a firm timeline of when events happen in the story, which means I've had to kind of piece things together myself. Hopefully it isn't too distracting and you enjoy the video nonetheless. Lastly, if you want a more focused telling of a particular DLC or the base game itself, I have several other videos in the lore of Dead Cells over on the YouTube channel, so go ahead and check those out if you're interested. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's get started. The story starts with an unnamed island kingdom, which by all accounts was a fine place to live. Most of the populace lived in Stilt Village, a shanty town on the shores of the island, where they spent their days fishing in order to gather food for their families. Others lived in the island's lighthouse, working around the clock to ensure that its beacon never went out, an important job as its light kept the ships that came to and went from the island safe from its rocky shoreline. There were also people that worked in a large cavern on the island, mining crystals which were used for trade, an extremely dangerous job, but necessary for the economy of the kingdom. Sharing the island with the denizens of the realm was a race of creatures named Gions, who ran the bank that held the wealth of the realm. The bank was a unique area of the kingdom because it didn't actually exist in the physical world.
Nah, I can't say that. I can't say that.
It was a pocket dimension that seemed to be the homeworld of the Gions, as there were statues honoring Gions of the past all over it, as well as a large library that held various books authored by the creatures. While the location of the bank wasn't definite, the money contained within it certainly was, and the breadth of that wealth was impressive to behold.
So let me guess, okay? Somebody broke into the bank and got all the wealth and knowledge, possibly. Is that what I'm expecting?
Most of the funds in the bank did not dwell with the common folk though, but instead to a noble/aristocratic class who used the money to do things like buy up land by the island's lighthouse in order to flaunt their status and wealth. These nobles and aristocrats regularly met with the realm's king in his home of High Peak Castle, and it was here in the home of His Majesty that the true wealth of the realm could be appreciated. The king lived in extravagance, exemplified by the decorative baubles that lined his halls and the priceless paintings that covered his walls. He had a massive distillery built to produce
Hold up.
True wealth of the realm could be appreciated. The king lived in extravagance, exemplified by the decorative baubles that lined his halls and the priceless paintings that covered his walls.
The painting of a deer. I'm not playing this anymore. Deer's in that game. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They have a lot of booty there. They have a lot of booty.
He had a massive distillery built to produce various alcoholic drinks to serve at his lavish banquets, and even had an entire arboretum built so that he, as well as the other nobles of the court, could take breaks from their stuffy work to relax in the calmness of nature. Protecting His Majesty and his palatial home was the Royal Guard, which was made up of many skilled and capable warriors. The two most prominent were the Giant, a gargantuan soldier who guarded the royal gates of the castle with his life, and the Hand of the King, a personal bodyguard to His Majesty who was incredibly loyal to him and totally idolized him. Perhaps due to the idolization he received from his soldiers, or maybe due to the prestige of his position getting to his head, the king is quite arrogant and egotistical, and he made grand displays to ensure the people of the realm knew who ruled them. The best examples were the statues of himself that he had built all over the island. There were statues in High Peak Castle, in Stilt Village, and even—
Bro's flexing everywhere, essentially. Interesting. So we got a king that is not a good king, not a good ruler. Very interesting.
all the way down in the cavern. There seemed to be no end to his arrogance. Likewise, the king was used to ruling with absolute authority, and he had no qualms about using his power to get rid of something he didn't like, which made him a bit of a despot. For instance, citizens that were sick or extremely poor were often banished from the kingdom and forced to live in a low-lying swampy area that came to be known as the morass of the banished.
Interesting. Bro was even basically... interesting. Remove the sick people completely to a separate area. Okay, the king is a truly interesting man. The more you know, the more reality seems further than heaven. Right, why did bro return and be so philosophical?
These people were forced to live a life of squalor, sharing their home with pests and parasites of the swamp, the worst of which were the ticks. To escape the filthy pools and biting insects, the banished took to the trees.
Yeah, ticks are the worst. They should be annihilated. Though this year I didn't see that many.
Constructing tree houses where they could be insulated from their repulsing home. The banished of the morass weren't the only people banned from the kingdom, as the king had also made royal decrees forbidding two other groups of people from living in the realm: the pagans and the apostates. The pagans were a people who followed a mysterious foreign religion out in an area named the
Makes sense, pagans, right? Erased poverty, literally. There are no poor people if there's no poverty, if there are no poor people. There's no sickness if there's no sick people. If you know, you know. Most people don't actually go to college. They only graduate in high school, maybe because college is too expensive. Likely, yes.
fractured shrines, which itself was highly mysterious. It was covered with floating rock islands with gigantic swords that had gigantic snakes coiled around them, driven through the islands, all of which had some shrines or altars on them. These shrines actually predated the establishment of the realm, belonging to a people known only as the Ancients. But what happened to the Ancients and how they built the shrines was a mystery never solved by the people of the realm. The shrines eventually became the home of the pagans, and due to their foreign ways, the king and his people distrusted the pagans, a feeling that was apparently mutual. Thus, when the king forbade his denizens from interacting with pagans, they celebrated the decision, superfluous as it was. But even with this decree, the king showed how self-serving he was, as he ignored his own ruling and took the queen of the pagans as his wife. The reasoning for this marriage is
Bro is like, hey, I don't like you at all. But game is game. Bro is like, I don't like what you believe in. I'ma still impregnate you.
unknown. The king could have taken a fancy to her, or forced her into marriage to subjugate her and her people. He may have even done it to get a hold of her vast treasure, which, judging by how packed full her treasure vault were, could rival his own. Whatever the case, once he married her, the queen was moved into the castle and given the royal treatment. She was decorated with jewels and fragrant roses, and a large painting of her image was hung among the other paintings in High Peak Castle. Just like the king, the queen had a royal protector to ensure no harm came to her, but unlike her husband, who only had one, the Hand of the King, the queen had three. Named Calliope, Euterpe, and Clio, they were three female warriors that were very skilled fighters. Individually, none of these women were as strong as the Giant or the Hand of the King, but unlike the other two who didn't get along with each other and thus didn't cooperate well, the queen's servants had amazing teamwork, and when they fought together, they could rival and even surpass any other soldier of the royal guard, giving the queen the strongest guardians in the kingdom.
Oh yeah, I will suffer playing this. Oh yeah, I will suffer playing this. Oh boy.
Just as the Hand idolized the king, the queen's servants were totally dedicated to her majesty, and would give their lives to see her safe. The story of the apostates, the other group banished by the king, was kind of the inverse of the pagans. While the pagans were shunned until one of their own was brought into the royal court, the apostates were part of the royal court until they were eventually shunned. The apostates used to be a group of healers and medicine men in the employ of the king. While their work was respected by the court, the apostates also employed some questionable methods when pursuing deeper knowledge. methods that bordered on the unethical. Eventually, a line was crossed, and while the exact details of what happened are unknown, what is known is that the apostates were charged with crimes against the crown. As punishment, the most senior member of their organization was put to death, and the rest were banished from the kingdom. They eventually took up residence on the rocky shoreline of the island, not far from the illustrious lighthouse, where, free from the morals of those that would constrain them, the apostates continued their amoral research. Rumors swirled about what this research was about. It was said the apostates conducted experiments with artifacts of the ancient.
Well, Undying Shores sounds like undead, so I'm considering this to be necromancy. Just an idea, cause right, undying, necromancy usually involving undead. That's my theory. Reality turned me into a pessimist. Turned me pessimistic. Ignore me. Stop being a pessimist. You must try. Billions must try. A new day arrives.
And that vile creatures were being seen in the area. But given the apostates' fascination with death, the most prevalent suggested it was necromantic in subject, which gave the home of the apostates a new name: the Undying Shores. The arrogant king and mysterious queen living in their palatial castle, the common folk living in wooden shacks or rocky tunnels or swampy filth, the beacon of the lighthouse seeming like it would stay lit for an eternity, and the apostates doing secret experiments out in the Undying Shores. This was the state of the island when a watershed moment occurred that changed it and the realm forever. In Stilt Village, people started to get sick. Symptoms started mild, itchiness, nausea, headaches, but got worse and worse until they finally culminated in death. Making matters worse was that this illness, which came to be known as the malaise, was incredibly contagious, and before long, the number of sick and dying in the village was...
It's the Malaysians. Anyways, interesting. So, is that where the main character likely originates from, and this kickstarts essentially his, journey? Realistically, that must be the reason.
Astronomical. Some people blamed insects for the infection, while others thought it was rats or other pests that were responsible. There were even rumors that the crystals of the cavern were somehow responsible for the start of the illness, but the exact vector of transmission was never uncovered in the early days of the infection. As people succumbed to their sickness, they were buried in a manner befitting their station. The common folk were buried in small plots in the common graveyard of the island, while the nobles and aristocrats were embalmed in sarcophagi and buried in a creepy sepulchre, oftentimes with their delegation. As the malaise picked up steam and the number of dead began to dramatically increase, the graveyard started to get cramped.
To my cat? No, not the kitty! Not the kitty. No.
While the sepulchre was nearly completely forgotten about. Things eventually got so bad that bodies began to pile up across the island, even lying in water sources, which only worsened the pandemic. A solution to this problem eventually arose, although it was in no way helpful. The people that had died of the malaise rose from their graves to come back to life, but had undergone mutations while they were dead, becoming violent.
Oh, so there are now that undead. See? That's how quickly it went. Undead people. I tried. I can't help it. Weak.
Horrifying monsters that attacked the living. As these monsters swarmed over the island, killing people and destroying the realm, the king took swift, drastic action against the malaise. There was a prison complex on the island that hadn't seen use in a long time, so the king ordered any infected person to be arrested and quarantined within the prison, thereby separating them from the rest of the healthy population. However, as the malaise pandemic grew worse, so too did the king's desperation to contain.
He really tried, like I said. There's no sick people. There's no sickness if there are no sick people. He really tried. I knew it.
And he eventually ordered his troops to imprison people that were only suspected of being infected, and even executed them. He also ordered the warden of the prison, a man named Caston, to keep people imprisoned even after they were proven to be healthy and their sentence expired. This, of course, led to overcrowding of the prison since people weren't getting taken out, while only more and more were being thrown in. And to deal with this, the king merely ordered the warden to start throwing people in the outdoor jail cells and oubliettes. In addition to the awful condition the prisoners were forced to live in, they were seen as less than human and even as less than animals by the prison guards, who often used the prisoners as toys for sport to alleviate their boredom. They even threw condemned prisoners from the ramparts to make things more exciting for themselves. As conditions grew worse for the prisoners, some began to plot and conduct escape attempts. One prisoner tried to climb the ramparts, but died on the climb. Instead of taking him down, the guards, in keeping with their cruel ways, left him up there to serve as a warning for the others. It didn't work though, and the escape attempts continued. The most common path that prisoners took was digging a tunnel through the prison to reach the vast sewer network underneath it, which...
The toxic sewers I would assume that the sewers are filled with the sickness there, aren't they?
They hoped to navigate to reach freedom. However, their hopes were misplaced as the sewers had become a dumping ground for the prison, meaning it was chock full of monsters of the Malays, monsters that quickly killed any escapees. There was also another danger in the sewers, one that resided deep within them, past its most ancient parts. Here, there was an insufferable crypt that was made into a storeroom by the king, and in the time since its conversion, it had become the home of a terrifying monster named Conjunctivius. Conjunctivius was a monster that had burst from the body of someone in the sewers. Whether she was the result of a malaise infection or some sort of mutation brought about by the toxic slime of the sewers is unknown, but after she was born, she lived in the sewers for an unknown time, killing another prisoner.
The sewer monster's real fucking Pennywise. Ish is interesting. Okay. I will uncover some of these things myself once I play it and suffer.
And spinning a cocoon to undergo a metamorphosis into her adult form. Eventually, she was captured and imprisoned in the converted storeroom. The king was evidently aware of the existence of Conjunctivius, as he ordered soldiers to throw dead bodies down to the storeroom in order to feed her. Whatever the reason he had for keeping her alive was unknown, but any prisoner that did make their way through the sewers had to pass through her home before leaving the labyrinths.
Damn, this bitch ugly. This bitch hella ugly. I see pain. I see pain on the screen, I can tell.
And Conjunctivius wasn't going to let a fresh meal escape her. As the escape attempts failed and the overcrowding got worse, the prisoners began to become unruly and disobedient. The warden dealt with them by tossing them into the prison depths, from whence they never returned. But despite this punishment, the disobedience continued. Eventually, a night of bloody riots broke out in the prison. The guards managed to quell the riots, but afterwards had a huge number of corpses to deal with. Not wanting to deal with the bodies reanimating, they decided the best course of action was to condemn a whole wing of the prison and throw the bodies inside of it, creating a makeshift ossuary in the prison complex. They then set the bodies ablaze, and
yeah, that's what I'm thinking, like, why are you keeping, like, the bodies around so they can reawaken if you could just burn them? Why didn't they think of this sooner? Interesting.
Smoke from the fires were so thick that prisoners within the main prison choked on them. However, despite their hopes that burning the malaise-infected bodies...
The smell might be crazy, too. The smell of burning human flesh might be crazy, too.
...could prevent them from reanimating. To their dismay, monsters rose from the ashes, and the whole wing was left to their shambling corpses. While the king and Castan desperately tried to keep affairs in the prison under control, outside the prison, things were devolving into chaos. It was soon found that the malaise could infect animals as well as people, and malaise-infected animals were soon seen across the island. The most terrifying of these monsters were the ticks of the morass of the banished, who grew in size, speed, and power. Every day before dawn, these soon found that the malaise could infect animals as well as people, and malaise-infected animals were soon seen across the island. The most terrifying of these...
That is one ginormous... That is one huge tick. That is... Somebody call pest control. What the that is one ginormous tick. Holy fuck.
These monsters were the ticks of the morass of the banished, who grew in size, speed, and power. Every day before dawn, these ticks swarmed from their nest in order to gather food for their mother, Mama Tick, whose own malaise transformation was unprecedented, as she ballooned...
Damn, that thing's fat. That is one ginormous tick. That's not just a tick anymore.
...into a bulbous, multi-eyed monstrosity. The banished soon found themselves in the sight of the ticks, and although their arboreal homes could keep them safe for a while, the banished knew it was only a matter of time before they would be overwhelmed by the insects. They decided on an unconventional method to solve the predicament they found themselves in. Instead of fighting against the brood, they decided to appease it. Knowing what the ticks hunted for, the banished offered them the only thing that could appease them: blood. Fresh blood. And in the swamps they called home, there was only one place to get that. The banished thus created a religion centered on the sacrifice of the highest order to their holy maternal figure, Mama Tick, offering up dozens, if not hundreds of their bodies to the creatures, all to receive Mama Tick's blessing and be allowed to see the next day. While this way of life was brutal, it seemed to have a hidden benefit for the banished, as while the rest of the realm was utterly devastated by the malaise, they seemed to be faring better than the rest of it, as unmutated banished could still be found in the trees of the morass. Perhaps by ridding themselves of corpses and therefore possible contaminated bodies, did the banished inadvertently find a method of slowing the spread of the malaise. However, they were not immune to the disease.
Okay, they were basically sacrificed themselves to a ginormous tick. And also avoiding, so to speak, the plague. Huh. Interesting.
Evidenced by Malays monsters being present in their tree houses, meaning it was likely only a matter of time before the Malays eventually consumed them all. In addition to infecting people and animals, it was discovered that the Malays had the ability to infect plants as well, as the mushrooms in the arboretum of the castle sprouted arms and legs and began to attack the guard stationed there. Additionally, the Venus flytraps swelled in size and gained a new appetite for flesh. Strangest of all, though, was the Malays' apparent ability to infect inanimate objects.
What can it not affect? Living organ, like humanoids, animals, dead people, plants, inanimate, objects. What the fuck is this?
Deep in the prison, there were rumors that its stones were being infected. A ridiculous rumor at first consideration, but one had to look no further than what happened in the island's bank and distillery to rethink that initial reaction. In the island's bank, the very gold itself seemed to come alive, and the large bags that Gians used for storage grew huge maws filled with rows of teeth. While the Gians themselves seemed to be immune, or at least resistant to the infection,
what, did I see that correctly?
Than what happened in the island's bank and distillery to rethink that initial reaction. In the island's bank, the very gold itself seemed to come alive, and the large bags that Gians used for storage grew huge maws filled with rows of teeth. While the
Wait, you buy something and then whatever you buy from tries to get rid of you? Or did he just pull a Kecleon and stole it? What the heck?
Gians themselves seemed to be immune, or at least resistant to the infection, given one of the creature's close association with Malays infected corpses. These monstrosities, along with Gians driven crazy with greed, wreaked havoc on the bank to the point where it had to be sealed up by its proprietors. In the castle distillery, which had since been converted into a powder keg factory, perhaps in an effort to create weapons to battle the monsters of the Malays, barrels of powder had been infected, leading to the barrels attacking the workers that made up the facility. Workers who retaliated by trying to blow up the barrels. Eventually, all the explosions from the living barrels and infected workers led to the distillery being derelict and disused. As the king's failures to contain the Malays continued to mount, panic gripped the denizens of the realm. Many began to openly revolt against the king and disobey his orders. Others saw the hopeless situation of the kingdom and attempted to flee the island by building ships to sail away from the realm. However, just like the prisoners that attempted to flee through the sewers, the hopes of those that attempted this escape were misplaced, as at some point, either shortly before the Malays pandemic or during it, the king had ordered the lighthouse to be extinguished after a strange scallop had washed onto the island, perhaps worried it was one of the vile creatures rumored to have been seen in the Undying Shores. Considering recent events in the realm, relighting the beacon of the lighthouse was likely low in the king's priority list, and as a result, when people tried to sail from the island, their ships crashed into the rocks of the shoreline and sank, creating a mound of wreckage around the structure that used to safely guide them to and from their home. In an attempt to solve this problem, a number of people went to the lighthouse to relight the beacon, but none of those that did ever returned, likely—
Surprise, surprise. It's likely that the Undying Shore is also affected by this, right? Makes sense.
Dying to either the monsters of the island or the monsters that infested the shipwreck at the base of the building. However, anyone that did make it to the lighthouse found that there was something else that was preventing the beacon from being relit, and it had to do with one of the royals that ruled the kingdom. Not the king though, but the mysterious queen. And the story of how she ended up there began with the apostates. In the Undying Shores, the apostates were indeed conducting a—
So the queen was corrupted and ended up in the lighthouse, and that's probably gonna be the boss right there, huh?
variety of blasphemous experiments, particularly around life and death. One big area of focus—
See what I said earlier? Undying Shore, undead people, necromancy.
Focus of theirs was centered on creating homunculi, artificial humans. The apostates had tried several times to create one of these homunculi, and although they were able to produce some of these beings, the early versions were seen as failures. It's not exactly clear why, but it could be—
And they can shoot their head.
Because the produced homunculi mindlessly shambled about until given direction, instead of acting as an independent entity. Perhaps a result of the apostates using corpses instead of a live subject during the process. In any case, after countless failures, the apostates were able to finally create a successful homunculus, using the Queen of the Realm to do so. However, after the Queen's transformation, her servants stormed the chamber that the work was taking place in, slayed all of the apostates, and freed Her Majesty. Actions that implied the experiment wasn't exactly consensual, and gives rise to the theory that the apostates may have kidnapped the queen and forced her to undergo the homunculus process. In any case, once the queen became a homunculus, she technically had been given away to survive the malaise, as her body was now artificial, meaning it couldn't be infected. But with the death of the ones
okay, the butt tells me something's gonna happen to her.
that created her, this process was something that couldn't be replicated, eliminating the possibility that the rest of the realm could become homunculi to outlast the malaise. Thus, she and her servants decided upon a new purpose. They would ensure that the malaise never left the shores of the island and infected the rest of the world. To do so, they took up residence at the lighthouse and prevented its beacon from being lit so that the people of the realm couldn't escape and that travelers from foreign lands couldn't come to the realm and get infected. Even going so far as to imprison or kill those that came to the lighthouse hoping for salvation. She may have also taken more direct action against those trying to escape, using her sword, which had the ability to slice through reality, to sink ships sailing in the waters around the island. In any case, the queen and her servants took up their endless vigil.
So the queen is actually technically a good one? In a way? By essentially not making it so that the disease further spreads? In a way, I think?
Knowing that they would be condemning the realm, but for the greater good of the world. Like the king and queen, there were a number of other people within the kingdom that also tried to find a solution to the pandemic tearing through the realm. One such person was a sorceress named the Timekeeper, who, in a deal with unknown details, had convinced the king to build her a large clock tower in the castle. From the clock room at the top of the tower, the Timekeeper used a multitude of clocks in the building to control the flow of time, in an effort to contain the malaise. Initial results seemed promising, as she was able to eliminate dozens of creatures in a single day. However, the longer her fight went on, the less effective she became at eliminating the monsters, indicating her solution was not going to be a permanent one. Despite this, the Timekeeper still played with time at the top of the clock tower, hoping to find a way to deal with the malaise. In addition to the efforts of the Timekeeper were the efforts of one of the royal gardeners in the employ of the king. After seeing the transformation of the plants in the arboretum of the castle, the gardener's curiosity was piqued, and he conducted a wide variety of experiments with the plants of the gardens and the monsters of the malaise.
Well, if plants are infected, animals are infected, humans are affected, that would technically mean that they would all need to have something in common. So, right, why not look at the plants, right? That makes sense. As they're probably the easiest ones to contain, possibly?
Which had interesting results. Unfortunately, none of the experiments gave him a cure for the sickness, but he was able to glean some more information about how the malaise was spread, determining that the water supply was contaminated and at least partially responsible for the spread of the infection. But before he could develop his theories further, the king ordered that the arboretum should be burned to the ground, much to the gardener's dismay. He ignored the king's orders, which resulted in a stern letter being sent his way from Gaston, who threatened to throw the gardener to the ticks of the morass if he continued being disobedient. Despite this warning, the gardener apparently continued to defy the king, resulting in his imprisonment in the prison, where he eventually died under unclear circumstances. However, death was not the end for the gardener, as before he died, he was infected with a malaise. Thus, not long after he died, he rose again, and unlike most, he found that he had not yet totally lost his mind to the terrible infection, but he could feel the madness beginning to encroach on him. He then marched across the island, hoping to come across someone that could help him resist the infection. He started with the Morass of the Banished, where one of their priests, who was friendlier than the gardener thought he'd be, gave the gardener some unknown plant mixture that didn't seem to help much. He then made his way to the Fractured Shrines, hoping that the isolation afforded to the queen's former subjects gave them enough time to find a cure. But his hopes were unfounded, as the pagans too had been affected by the infection, mutating into half-man, half-snake hybrids.
Lamias? Lamia! That's essentially what it is, right? Crazy. Interesting. So interestingly enough that the gardener is able to essentially resist it. That's very interesting.
He then turned his hopes to the apostates of the Undying Shores, but was dismayed to find that the apostates had also succumbed to the infection like the rest of the island. The gardener's next destination was the Darkened Lighthouse, perhaps hoping that he could light its beacon to call for help, or to meet with the queen to see if she knew of some way to cure him. But he never made it to the building. He took up residence in a mausoleum near the Undying Shores and underwent his malaise transformation, becoming an entity known as the Scarecrow, who grew plants in the mausoleum, a sort of horrifying echo of what he did in his former.
So bro failed regardless. Sag.
life. There was one other person that was trying to find a solution to the malaise, a man known as the Alchemist, who, like the gardener, was more science-oriented than magic-oriented. Although he wasn't liked by the giant nor the Hand of the King, a rare thing that the two did agree on, the king trusted the alchemist immensely, so much so that he built a huge astrolabe and observatory in the castle for the alchemist to do his work. In addition to conducting a wide variety of experiments in these locations, the alchemist also traveled across the island to do the same with the corpses left in the wake of the malaise, as well as on villagers that volunteered their bodies to his cause. Like the gardener, he was interested in the botanical manifestations of the malaise in the Arboretum and got some of the royal guards to get him a specimen. Using the specimen, as well as a living volunteer, the alchemist performed an experiment in High Peak Castle that resulted in a half-man, half-plant hybrid. The experiment unfortunately cost the volunteer his life, so the alchemist gave up on doing further research in this vein. But the fact that a whole wing of the castle was eventually dominated by the branches of a large man-like plant suggests the results of his experiment may have differed from his conclusion. The alchemist's travels across the island eventually led him to a slumbering sanctuary that Stilt Village was built over, a location that, like the fractured shrines, may have been built by the ancients, the society that predated the realm. Set in the walls of this sanctuary were pipes with a strange orange sap running through them. He noted that the same material seemed—
It's orange juice. It's clearly it's orange juice, very clearly. I can tell. Interesting.
to be running through the pipes in an ancient part of the sewers, and theorized that if something happened to one of these pipes, then the sap could have contaminated the water supply and led to the spread of the malaise. This finding also lined up with the findings of the gardener, who thought contaminated water contributed to the spread of the malaise. Believing that understanding this sap would lead to a cure, the alchemist took some samples of the material and started performing experiments with it. While some of them seemed to be promising, slowing the rate at which an infected person transformed, there were also less positive results, like melting the skin off the bone when applied to someone.
Ooh! Well, that's not fun. Damn. They essentially got makeup from Temu right there.
More work with the sap was needed before it was fit for purpose, but before long, some members of the royal guard came to the alchemist with a new lead. The soldiers had been sent to the Undying Shores by the king, who believed the apostates were in some way responsible for the start and spread of the malaise. After the apostates fled from them, the soldiers ransacked their labs and brought their scrolls and notes to the alchemist, who was so intrigued by the knowledge that he went to the Undying Shores himself. Once there, he met with the apostates, and, finding that they were of similar mind and disposition to him, shared notes with them, where he learned of their work creating homunculi, along with another facet of their research: blue cells that seemed to hold the essence of life itself. Seeing all these notes gave the alchemist the hope that by using the homunculus process, along with the cells—
Interesting, we got blue cells that hold the essence of life. And that's likely what he experimented on. But since the stuff is so adaptable, wouldn't it also be able to infect that just as much?
the spread of the malaise could finally end, and the time to put his hope to the test was quickly thrust upon him, as by this point, things had considerably worsened for the realm. The king's autocratic behavior had become so bad that he was now a full-blown tyrant, resulting in even his loyal soldiers questioning his methods. The king responded to this doubt by executing soldiers that didn't follow his—
My prediction for the king is that by the end of this, he's going to be he's also going to be infected. That is what I am going to believe, and what I'm going to see is that he's going to be infected completely too.
orders. Even the giant was not spared this fate, as when he met with the king in an attempt to persuade him to change, a spear was thrust through his gut and his body was thrown into the prison, which was no longer the bastion of safety it initially was.
Is that one going to wake up too?
As it was getting overwhelmed. The guards of the prison were finally getting sick, transforming into monsters, a fate shared by the warden, Caston, who transformed into a monster known as the Concierge. The Concierge, perhaps holding on to some remnant of his duty from his former life, took up residence on the Black Bridge into and out of the prison, stopping anyone that attempted to cross it. With the deaths of the guards and the warden, the prison fell, and so too did the primary method of containing the malaise, meaning malaise monsters soon swarmed freely over the realm. In a final retreat, the royal guard pulled all the way back to High Peak Castle and sealed the gates, hoping they would be able to survive. But it was all for naught, as the malaise made its way into the castle, decimating the guard, and worst of all, infecting the king. With his infection, it seemed the
Knew it! I knew it!
final death knell for the realm was nigh. However, it was at this point that the alchemist stepped in. Using the knowledge he gained from the apostates, he successfully created a homunculus and imprinted the soul of the king into it. However, unlike the queen, whose homunculus transformation was perfect, the king's transformation was imperfect. Like the failed homunculi of the apostates, the king had to rely on possessing corpses, typically without a head, to take a form that wasn't the slithering, blobby mass he now was. Unlike his kin, though, the king was able to retain his sentience and could freely move about and make decisions. But in the process of becoming a homunculus, he had lost all of his memory and empathy, forgetting he was the king and the responsibilities he had to the realm. Meaning when he awoke, he didn't choose.
Surprise, surprise, the king is now no longer king. I knew it that the king would be infected. I knew it. I just knew it.
A new noble cause like the queen did. He was a blank slate that was learning about the world all over again. Upon seeing the results of his homunculus experiments, the alchemist deemed it a failure and disappeared, likely to run away from his shame and embarrassment. However, unbeknownst to him, by transforming the king into a homunculus, he had set into motion events that would eventually lead to that goal that he and...
Okay, king now homunculus, queen now homunculus, what else? We haven't heard anything from the main character yet, so that's going to be interesting.
Everyone in the realm had been searching for so long. The cure to the malaise. That path started in the prisoner's quarters. Upon taking his new homunculus form, the king slithered here and possessed a headless body. After familiarizing himself with his new form and looking over the corpse of his former confidant, the giant, he...
Wait, the main character is the king! Oh! Well, now, interesting. Okay, that makes more sense. So basically the main... Okay, the MC, the main character is the king. That's interesting. Finally, well, events of the game, right? Well, the chapter says it. Interesting.
Met a knight who commented on the unique condition afforded to him by his new state of being. He could no longer die. Being a homunculus, he was immune to the malaise, and if he were attacked by the monsters of the island and sustained enough damage to die, it was only his possessed body that was destroyed. His homunculus form would remain undamaged, and the king could just return to the prisoner's quarters to possess a new body. If this happened, upon his next journey through the realm, the king would notice that the monsters of the malaise had returned, and the landscapes and environments of the island had shifted around, now being different from what they were before. The only explanation for this phenomena he received was from the knight he met before, who simply said that it seemed the island was alive. Another possible explanation could have been the time shenanigans of the timekeeper, who may have been messing with different timelines to keep the realm from falling completely. In any case, using his newfound powers and the seemingly endless amount of corpses in the prison, the king explored the island, seeing the extent of the damage that the malaise and its monsters had wreaked upon its realm. As he did so, he met a few friendly faces amongst the various monstrosities of the land. The first was a hooded man named the Collector that had a large vat of the blue cells of the apostates upon his back. Among the new abilities the king gained from his transformation was the ability to gather these cells from various sources on the island, like old chests, random vats just lying on the ground, or most commonly from the creatures of the malaise when they were killed. The Collector told the king that he would give him some new weapons and gear in exchange for these cells. He didn't say why he was gathering the cells, nor how he knew about them. But the king wasn't in the business of asking questions, so happily handed over any cells he gathered in his journeys for new items.
Well, if he doesn't remember, then he kind of can't, he can't know.
Alongside the Collector were Guions that had thus far avoided being killed by monsters of the malaise, that offered to temporarily upgrade his weapons for gold, permanently upgrade his gear for cells, or give him mutations to grant him more abilities. These latter offerings were only temporary and were different from the runes that the king could find in the realm, which gave him new abilities that were permanent. With the help of his newfound abilities and allies, the king made his way through the remnants of his kingdom, seeing many of its sights and killing many of its mutated denizens along the way. The only one who managed to escape him was the Timekeeper, who, after being defeated in battle in the clock room atop her tower, warped away through time before being killed. The king eventually made it to his old throne room, where his personal bodyguard, the Hand of the King, still guarded his comatose body. The Hand cast a spell around the king on the throne and, obviously not recognizing the king in his new form, attempted to kill him, but he himself was defeated by his liege. Afterwards, the king used the Hand's lance to break the bubble shield around his body, and, not recognizing himself, killed it by driving the lance through it.
Whoa, interesting! He delete himself! Wow, that's interesting. That's crazy! That's awesome! This is good. Okay, wow.
A power then welled up within his body and erupted, disintegrating the corpse the king currently possessed. His homunculus form stayed intact, though, and slinked into a nearby fountain, crawling through the plumbing until ending up at the prisoner's quarters, whereupon the king possessed a new body. Immediately afterwards, he noticed that the body of the giant was gone, and a booming rumble in the distance pulled him to investigate. Upon catching a glimpse of the reanimated soldier descending into lava, the king began to consider the thought that things might have changed on the island, a thought further supported when he reached High Peak Castle again, and found that all that remained of his body and his throne was smoldering ruin. However, at the same time, much more seemed like it hadn't changed. The monsters of the Malays were just as numerous as before, and all the bosses he'd killed had returned, including the Hand of the King, who now guarded the ruins of what remained of his throne. And no matter how many more times he completed his journey through the realm, it never changed from this state. It seemed like he found himself in a sort of endless cycle, and was doomed.
So a time loop, essentially. It's a loop. It's just a time loop. Interesting. Very interesting, huh?
To spend the rest of his immortal days trapped in it. However, there was a way for him to break the cycle, and it lied in a reward he received after killing the Hand of the King, which was a unique red cell called a boss cell that modified the island on his next journey through it, making the monsters of the Malays more dangerous and numerous, reducing the number of resources available to him, and unlocking wooden doors that were previously inaccessible. After the king completed a run through the realm with one of these boss cells active, another would become available, which, when used, amplified their effects even further, and unlocked more of the wooden doors. The Hand was not the only person that the king could gather these boss cells from. There were two others that dropped them and defeated him, one of whom was a monster from another world, and the other was an important person from the king's past. In the case of the first,
okay, I would assume the queen. Yet you need to defeat the queen.
One day, a pedestal appeared in the lobby of the prisoners' quarters that told of independent legends, heroes from other worlds. After its appearance, the king began to find strange rooms in the prisoners' quarters that held the weapons, items, and if you met certain conditions, outfits of these heroes.
There's a fucking car? There's a car! Why is there a car?
There was the flask and armor of a penitent one that hailed from a land of deep religious worship named Custodia. There was the Letterman jacket and rooster mask of a vigilante nicknamed Jacket, who used a wooden bat to cave in the skulls of his enemies. There was the bath.
And he's a fucking chicken. Wait, is that the... No, that can't be the DLC, can it?
Robe, hairstyle, and katana of a swordsman named Zero, who was able to slow his perception of time in order to enhance his prowess in battle. And many others. With the appearance of the items of these heroes, it seemed like the boundaries between worlds were being blurred somehow. This strange phenomena eventually came to a head when a large, sinister castle manifested in the realm, unleashing evil creatures and waves of bats upon the kingdom. When the king went to investigate, he soon met a vampire hunter.
Oh, well, that's the DLC. Okay, the DLC part is that, right? The DLCs are being added, okay.
Named Richter Belmont that explained that the undead overlord Dracula was returning. He asked for the king's help in preventing that return, something the king agreed to do. He then made his way through the outskirts and interior of Dracula's castle, passing by many references to the original world of Dracula and Richter, and meeting Dracula's son Alucard, who promised to help in the fight. As he was approaching Dracula's keep, he was ambushed by the vampire lord's lieutenant, Death, who intended to defend his lord. But despite wielding a huge amount of power, the entity was defeated by the king. Alucard appeared soon after and told the king that, despite Death's defeat, the ritual to bring Dracula back had gone through. Complicating matters was that, due to Death being the physical manifestation of, well, death, he couldn't truly be defeated, and he would stop any attempts at reaching Dracula's keep, so a different path to his father's keep would have to be taken. After some time, Alucard found one that went through the realm's clock tower, and once the king took this path, he was able to bypass Death and meet the vampire lord face to face. It seemed that Dracula underestimated the king, as in the ensuing fight, he was quickly defeated by his foe. That was when he decided to reveal his true, demonic, bat-like form and attacked the king with the full extent of his power. However, thanks to the power of his homunculus form, the king was able to defeat Dracula and watch his castle crumble as the vampire lord was defeated.
Then we have King, this guy, and that guy. Interesting. I jumped, bro. I heard Richter Belmont. Bro, I'm playing Smash Bros. Online as him right now. Well, they do have a DLC for this, so that makes sense.
Once and for all. Once the king returned to the prisoner's quarters following Dracula's defeat, he would collect his new boss cell. As for the other person the king could get a boss cell from, similar to his Castlevania encounter, one day, in the lobby of the prisoner's quarters, a tentacle delivered a letter to the king. The writer of the letter was a portly, tentacled creature known as the Fisherman, who was sick of being trapped on the island, and hearing about the king's repeated runs through it, hoped he would help him escape. Once the king met the fisherman in the sewers, the creature explained that while looking for a ship to use to flee, he noticed the extinguished lighthouse of the island and thought it was the best method they could use to escape. Of course, the lighthouse was also where the queen now resided, who the king hadn't seen in who knew how long. But due to his homunculus transformation, he didn't remember her, much less knew where she went after being transformed, meaning the significance of his journey there was lost on him. So after making a stop in one of the lighthouse keeper's homes to gather a key to the building, finding that the man had succumbed to a little crustaceous creature named a leg hugger at some point in the past, the king sailed with the fisherman to
A leg hugger? Crazy work.
the lighthouse, blissfully ignorant of what awaited him there. The two couldn't sail directly to the building though, so the fisherman dropped the king off at the infested shipwreck, and the king had to fight through the Malaise monsters and armored shrimps that resided within them to reach his destination. When he reached the lighthouse and went to climb it, Calliope, Euterpe, and
Wait, you can have fucking pets in that thing too? Holy shit, dude, that's crazy.
Cleo, the servants of the queen, tried to fight him off, adamant on performing the duty they and their queen had taken up. But despite their amazing teamwork, they were defeated by the king. With their defeat, the king proceeded to the crown of the structure, where he was reunited with his wife, the queen, herself in her homunculus form. Despite being reunited with her love, the queen was determined to prevent the reignition of the beacon of the lighthouse and the spread of the Malaise to the wider world, so attacked her husband. However, having lost his memory and empathy, the king felt no remorse as he defeated his wife and killed her by kicking her into the fires that had accidentally been—
Damn! Bro, is him? Fuck the bitch. Crazy. Wow. Okay, well, he's not a nice dude. Yeah, I mean he has no empathy. Though the question was if he didn't even have any before being turned to homunculus.
lit when he entered the building. As the sun rose on a new day for the realm, the king noticed a ship on the horizon which had been led to the island by the relit lighthouse. However, all the sailors aboard the ship were monsters of the Malaise, indicating the cause that the queen had been fighting for was all for naught, as the Malaise had already reached the outside world. The king, however, wasn't too broken up about it, and with his new boss cell in tow, headed back to the prisoners' quarters to begin the cycle anew. No matter which of the three the king got his boss cells from, he repeated the cycle until he got 4 of them, after which he could get no more from these foes. 4 boss cells allowed him to open up every wooden door on the island. Every door except the one that led to the astrolabe of the alchemist, which required 5 cells to open. In order to get this last cell, the king needed to meet someone else from his past, the giant who dove to the deepest part of the island's cavern after rising from where the king threw his corpse. After grabbing a key to the cavern and unlocking the region by putting it in a lock in the island's graveyard, the king descended down to the Guardian's Haven to meet the giant face to face. The gargantuan soldier recognized the king, even saying as much at one point, and in a fit of—
My king, die. No, not... Bro is deleting everyone he knew.
anger, attacked him as revenge for his death and all that the king had wrought upon the realm. However, the giant could not overcome his liege, and he was defeated by him. When this defeat came with the king having 4 boss cells activated, then the giant gave him the 5th one before blowing up in a brilliant explosion. With all 5 boss cells now in his possession, when the king made it to the throne room, he could finally open the door behind his throne and explore the alchemist's astrolabe. The king explored the labs and chambers of the alchemist, reading his notes on all his failed experiments and seeing the diagrams and schematics of his work, until he climbed to the highest point in the kingdom, the observatory. Here, he met an unexpected face, the Collector, who had thus far been absent in the king's 5 boss cell run of the kingdom. Standing before a massive catalyst, the man revealed why he had been asking the king to gather all of those sounds. He was using—
He's the villain. Is he the final boss? Is he the villain? Is he the evil dude that causes all of this?
them to make the panacea, a tonic that could cure any disease. Problem with that, though, was that the panacea was a myth, and as the Collector went on a monologue about the implausibility of it working, about the crimes he'd committed and the failures of everything else he'd done, something became clear. He was the alchemist. Despite disappearing following his failed experiment with the king, he hadn't given up hope on finding a cure to the malaise, and believing the cells of the apostates would eventually lead him to—
Okay, he's not, but who has caused it? Where is the final boss? Where is this coming from?
To it, he continued working on finding that cure. It all led up to this moment, his only hope being a fairy tale told to children. He downed the blue liquid, and to his surprise, it actually worked. A huge surge of power coursed through his body from the potion, which prompted an evil, terrifying grin to appear on his face. Addicted to the power given to him by the panacea, the Collector started a fight with the king, intending to send him back to the prisoners' quarters so he could gather more cells for him.
Crazy. Okay, so that's that is what he was doing. Interesting.
The king managed to survive the onslaught of the Collector, but anytime he would begin to come out ahead, the Collector would put up a shield and take a drink from the panacea, thereby restoring his vitality and undoing all the work the king had done. This pattern continued until at the top of the observatory, the Collector forgot to put up his shield, and the king knocked the panacea out of his hands. He immediately took a drink from the potion himself, which supercharged his own power and allowed him to finally beat the Collector. On his hands and knees, the Collector lamented his final failure, that he couldn't save the kingdom from the king that mismanaged everything so much that it led to its downfall.
Save it from an ass like you. Yeah, true. I'm back. My mom said go inside. She's talking to someone else about that explosion sound. Okay. Interesting.
Then, his head was caved in by the boot of the king. As he stepped away from the corpse of the Collector, the king began to feel the effects of the panacea on his own body. As he relished in the moment where he would finally be free of the cycle of the kingdom, the king's body disintegrated, leaving his homunculus form behind, and then, that was it. Nothing else happened. Defeated, the king slithered back to the prisoner's quarters and took over a new body.
Not again. Is this ever ending? How often has he been doing this?
To begin the cycle anew. However, this time when the king set out, he was sucked into a portal that opened up behind him. He found himself in the clock
the time dude. Okay.
Room of the timekeeper, who yelled at him for what he'd done, requiring her to mess with the loop again. After casting the spell, the timekeeper walked over and kicked the king, sending him through a portal that she didn't realize had opened behind him, which was apparently a big mistake. The king found himself in the prisoner's quarters again, starting his normal routine, but then met a familiar, if glitchy, face. The knight that had greeted him when he first set out on the island, saying the exact same things as when they first met. It seemed like he'd been sent back in time. Indeed, when he made it back to his throne room, he found his comatose body was back on the throne of stone, and was again guarded by the hand of the king, indicating that—
Well, is the cycle broken if he doesn't destroy the body?
The timekeeper had sent him back to the original loop, before he killed the Collector, before he killed the king, but after he had gained all the powers from his previous journeys. Thus, this time, after he defeated the hand and shattered the shield around his body, he used the homunculus rune to detach his homunculus form from his current body and reclaim his original one. Moments after reclaiming it, the king noticed that it was still infected with the malaise and wondered if there was a way to cure the ailment. Of course, he knew the Collector's plan, so again made his way to the observatory, gave the Collector the cells needed to make the panacea, knocked it out of his hands during their fight, then drank it and killed his opponent. Once the fighting was done, the king noticed that instead of dissolving his body like before, the panacea lived up to its legend and not only cured his body of the malaise, but bound his soul back to it, restoring the king to his true self. However, in the process of being restored, the king had killed the only person that knew how to create the panacea, meaning that by saving himself, he had doomed everyone else in the realm, and evidently the entire world. He didn't seem too broken up about that though, as a short time later, he lounged on his throne, sipping wine and complaining that he was having more fun killing the monsters that overran his kingdom. At that moment, someone approached him. It was a glitched out version of himself as a homunculus, the version that originally inhabited this timeline. After the two of them mimicked each other's movements and flipped each other off, they each powered up and attacked, starting a fight to see which of them was the strongest. And as that fight began, the story of Dead Cells came to an end. While it's the gameplay loop that draws most players to Dead Cells as they explore the island—
That's it? That's it? That's it? What? So the entire loop, the entire time, just for bro to be potentially once again be in a permanent loop, fighting himself now. The fuck is, what the heck?
And come across the lore rooms, they begin to get pieces of the story, which is like a little mystery that invites players to solve it. Those that take the time to do so get to see a story about a kingdom ravaged by an unstoppable disease, the heroics of those that tried to save it from that disease, and how its autocratic ruler robbed it of its salvation by being, as the giant put it, an incorrigible ass. It's
Here's Croc. Hi, Croc. How you doing? Hope you're doing good. Wow. Sequel, question mark?
sprawling and captivating, and owes its existence to its developers, Motion Twin and Evil Empire, who deserve all the praise they get for the work they've put into the game over the years. Now, I'm not perfect, so there may be some errors in there somewhere, but this should cover everything, or most everything, in the lore and story of Dead Cells. If you have any lingering questions, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. Likewise, if there was anything you feel was missed or wrong, or you have some thoughts or theories of your own, feel free to share your thoughts/corrections in the comments. I know I'd love to hear them, and maybe they would help someone else understand things too. Before I go, I'd like to remind you that you can listen to the audio of this video along with all my other ones over on Spotify, so go listen over there if you're interested. Alright, I think that's everything, so until next time, thank you for watching, and see you later.
That was crazy. I did not understand most of it, because obviously I haven't played the game. But that was crazy. So it's essentially just an entire loop that ends up technically with no good ending, except he's essentially fighting himself from another timeline. Interesting. Well, that was an interesting lore video. Though, to be fair, I don't know. I'm gonna play this game and see how it goes, right? I'm gonna play this game and see how it goes. Anyways, like, comment, and subscribe.